The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Hati, Kodi, Karkemish, Arzawa, and Alashia on, being cut off at one time. A camp was set up in one place in Amuru. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which has never come into being. They were coming forward toward Egypt, while the flame was prepared before them. Their confederation was the Peliset, Tejeker, Shekelesh, Danuna, and Washesh, lands united. They laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting. This text comes from the walls of the mortuary temple of Pharaoh Ramesses III, describing an assault on Egypt and the surrounding region that's believed to have occurred in the year 1177 BCE by groups of marauders we today call the Sea Peoples. This was not just some standard attack. These Sea Peoples, who seem to have been made up of many different ethnicities and cultural groups from across the Mediterranean world, came seemingly out of nowhere. As far as we can tell, they weren't attacking on behalf of any particular state. If anything, they seem to have been fleeing from somewhere or something. Perhaps it was a drought or famine, or perhaps a great, undocumented war. The aforementioned text doesn't tell us much, only that they caused havoc on the countries and cities that they encountered on their way to the great kingdom along the Nile. So, who were the Sea Peoples? What did they want? And what in the end happened to them? These are questions that have fascinated and perplexed both historians and archaeologists alike for well over a century. There are many different theories out there. In this program, though, we'll focus on what the consensus of historians and archaeologists seem to agree on with regard to these extremely mysterious groups of people. In a broad sense, the Sea Peoples were large groups of peoples who, according to most Egyptian records, are said to have swept through and devastated many parts of the Eastern Mediterranean world in the early 12th century BCE. The Egyptians, however, didn't call them Sea Peoples. The term was actually coined in the 19th century by Egyptologist Gaston Maspero, who called them this because, according to the Egyptian records and inscriptions that he was studying, they seem to have mostly come on ships from the Mediterranean Sea. The term Sea Peoples is a bit misleading because many of these groups may not have even been of coastal or island origin, nor were their activities confined to such places. This name, though, has stuck with us, and it's what we use today in a broad sense when referring to them. We hear of groups called the Sherden, Shekelesh, Ekwesh, Luka, and Teresh attacking the cities of the Nile Delta from records dating to the 5th year of Pharaoh Merneptah's reign, which was around 1207 BCE. Though the Sherden are mentioned in earlier Egyptian texts as a specific group of pirates, in this particular instance, they form part of a larger assembly of hostile peoples. Merneptah claims that he was successful in repelling the invaders, but little did he know that many of their kind would return in the not-so-distant future. The year of their return, according to most scholars, was 1177 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses III. According to inscriptions on the walls of his mortuary temple, the Sea Peoples were actually comprised of both naval and land forces. Their ships not only contained veteran warriors, but also their families, which included their wives, children, and even the elderly. They attacked and destroyed cities in Anatolia, which at the time would have been under the rule of the Hittite Empire, Alasya, which is the old name for the island of Cyprus, and ports and cities along the Canaanite coast, such as Ugarit. Cities further inland, such as Karkemish, were also sacked. As mentioned earlier, the Sea Peoples were a diverse group. Historian, archaeologist, and professor of ancient history at the George Washington University, Eric H. Klein, who has spent over 30 years in the field, writes the following of their appearance. There were no uniforms, no polished outfits. ancient images portray one group with feathered headdresses, while another faction sported skull caps. Still others had horned helmets or went bareheaded. Some had short pointed beards and dressed in short kilts, either bare-chested or with a tunic. Others had no facial hair and wore longer garments, almost like skirts. These observations suggest that the Sea Peoples comprised diverse groups from different geographies and different cultures. Armed with sharp bronze swords, wooden spears with gleaming metal tips, and bows and arrows, they came on boats, wagons, ox carts, and chariots. Where the Sea Peoples were from is still a hotly debated topic. Most scholars seem to believe that the groups known as the Ekwesh were of Greek origin. The Peliset may have originally been from the island of Crete, while the Teresh and Luca were sailors from Anatolia. The Sherdin may have been Sardinians, while the Sekelesh may have been from Sicily. If these are all true, then it's apparent that the Sea Peoples were quite diverse in terms of their origin. As with most things from this early in history, it's difficult to know for sure. In 1177 BCE, the Sea Peoples arrived with an armada in the Nile Delta region with their Libyan allies, while other groups moved along the land. In order to defeat them, Ramesses III first positioned military units on his eastern border and then fortified various branches of the Nile in the Delta region. However, he did allow various contingents of Sea Peoples to enter parts of the Delta by ship so that his navy could ambush them. This strategy worked, with the result being that the Egyptians were able to annihilate the enemy fleet. On land, the Sea Peoples' forces were met by the Egyptian cavalry around the Egyptian-controlled frontier regions in what's today Lebanon. Here too, the Sea Peoples faced devastating losses. Their invasion collapsed, and many were taken prisoner. Some were made into slaves, but others, especially those who were able seamen or skilled navigators, were recruited into the Egyptian navy. Some of their warriors also found their way into the pharaoh's personal guard and were given plots of land in order to secure their loyalty. One group, the Peliset, were given land just outside of Egypt and became vassals to the pharaoh. These people are believed by many to have been the early Philistines that are mentioned in the Bible. The generalization that the Sea Peoples were simply a large group of pirates and marauders is a bit simplistic. These groups were likely fleeing drought, famine, massive upheavals, or a combination of all of these in their own lands. As many desperate migrants do, they wandered to the areas of their world that they believed held greater promise and opportunities for a better, more stable life. So, instead of being the cause of the Bronze Age collapse, as they're often portrayed, they were among its many victims. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the arrival of the Sea Peoples left a huge impact on the political landscape of places such as southern and central Anatolia, Cyprus, Canaan, the Levant, and of course, Egypt. By facilitating the destruction of the Hittite Empire along with the coastal cities of Canaan and the Levant, they created a huge power vacuum in the region. Though the Egyptians survived the ordeal, they were greatly weakened to the extent that they could no longer hold on to their possessions in Canaan and northern Syria, and thus they lost their empire in the east. As a result, new, local kingdoms established themselves in both Anatolia and Canaan. We'll take a look at these kingdoms and other new states in another episode. Thanks so much for joining me, I really appreciate it, and I really hope you learned something about the Sea Peoples or the region in general. If you did, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You might also be interested in subscribing to the podcast, where I go into a lot more detail of many of the topics that are covered here. You can also find History with Sai on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next episode.